Everybody, welcome back this afternoon to our 2 p.m. session. Begin with the end in mind. So everybody wants the exit, and most exits in medtech are sales to strategics. So this panel has reps from regional and highly active strategics with extensive merger and acquisition track records who will share what they look for and what they don't in a deal. So leading the conversation today is John Lewis, President and CEO of BioOhio, and one of the fearless volunteer track captains who helped organize today's event. So thank you, John. And our panelists are Russ Schuster, Senior Vice President and Strategy and Business Development Lead at Cardinal Health, and Aaron Johnson, Director of Corporate Business Development at Stryker. If you've got questions for our panelists, in the Startup Week app, go to session Q&A and type those in, and we will make sure that they get to them either during the session or after, and they can chat with you directly. John, I'll let you take it from here.
All right. Thank you, Audrey. I know you've been busy all day, popping in and out and doing that great little intro for each little session. So thank you. Well, we have a fast and furious 45 minutes this afternoon. Thank you all for being here. And then I'll say a thank you for those that will be watching this after the fact, because it is being videoed, and there'll be others that will watch what we talk about, Aaron and Russell. It's kind of always cool to be archived. So nothing, don't do anything dumb. Come on, be good, be good. So those of you that don't, or as many of you do know BioOhio, we've been around now for 33 years as the leading bioscience trade association. We say bioscience, that means for us, everything med device, diagnostic, drugs and pharmaceutical, healthcare IT, a bit of ag bio, and all the ancillary services, supply chain that kind of feeds into that. So we're, like to say proudly, we're an amazing resource for you, regardless of where you are in your journey, whether you're this entrepreneur with an awesome idea, or whether you're one of these part of one of these two companies here, Stryker and Cardinal Health, multi-billion-dollar players at the end of the supply chain. But also the very, very end is ultimately the patient. That's what we're here to ultimately help and serve. So I think it's always, it makes me proud now, being in my 20th year with BioOhio as of last week, that it is the patients that ultimately what we do day in and day out. That's what we are here to serve. Help their quality of life. Help them through whatever it is they're going through, and you'll hear that. So how do we make that happen? Well, making it happen quicker is better, and getting your product into market is better for everybody, not just you as a company, but obviously the end result as the patient in the system. So we're gonna hear from two angles here. Obviously, this whole day is med device diagnostic focused. Okay, so both Aaron here from Stryker and Russell from Cardinal Health, we'll have that med device bent to it. Okay. They're also very well versed on other things too, because there's not much, whether it's a drug or a device, it doesn't integrate with some data component. Not that that's their level of expertise, but each of these entities are wired into data and telehealth and things like that. So I think the questions can be broad ranging. Keep that in mind. And I don't know, with that, let's just start with the beginning of the alphabet. We'll start with Cardinal, since C is earlier than S. And so we didn't plan who was going first or second. I just came up with that. So Russell, I don't like to read bios. Your bio's on the event website, and we've sent that out. But you can certainly share some highlights from your own perspective about yourself. And then kick into what you want to talk about. We've all had prep calls and stuff, so you're on, Russell.
Sure, happy to, and maybe I'll start off with a little bit of an overview of Cardinal Health, just to put it in reference or give you guys a frame of reference. John and the Bio organization, thank you guys very much for the opportunity. Look forward to hopefully answering some questions from the team today. So first, Cardinal Health. Cardinal Health, based in Columbus, just outside Dublin, Ohio. It's a name you may have heard, but may not know what we do. It's traditionally been largely a business-to-business provider. We're organized in two major divisions. The first, our pharmaceutical business, which focuses on the distribution of specialty as well as generic and branded drugs across hospitals, pharmacies, pretty much anywhere you can have access to pharmaceuticals. Cardinal Health distributes into those venues. On the other side of the business, we have our medical segment, which is both a manufacturer as well as a distributor for the gamut of medical supplies, primarily into the acute or hospital sector. But we also serve outside of that space into long-term care, physician office, and a variety of other settings. You can think of us as really trying to bring the suite of what a clinician needs to serve a patient, putting that in their hands in a cost-effective way, and really consolidating the number of suppliers that they have to work with. So we're really active in the supply chain, both downstream to the customers that are serving patients, but also upstream and working with manufacturers, device makers, data companies, payers, et cetera, to help drive efficiencies throughout the supply chain and get supplies and drugs where they need to go. In terms of my experience, I'll just give a quick overview. I actually grew up here in Ohio, spent the majority of my career in Chicago in advisory roles. So first on the consulting side, and then later in investment banking or mergers and acquisitions work. About 3.5 years ago, I returned to Ohio and took a role with Cardinal Health with their M&A team, and spent my first couple of years in that role prior to moving over to lead our strategy and business development efforts for the medical segment, which again is the supplies side of Cardinal Health. So really looking forward to trying to give you guys a little bit of a peek under the hood as to what we look for, how we think about innovation and smaller business and partnering, as well as acquiring, to bring those capabilities and provide scale and bring those to market in a holistic way. So maybe I'll stop there, John, and let you turn it over for some introductions from Aaron.
Aaron, tag. S is next in the alphabet, right after C. So Stryker and Aaron Johnson.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Russell. Yeah, looking forward to questions, looking forward to the dialogue over the next 45 minutes. Yeah, my name's Aaron Johnson. I work for Stryker. I'm based out of Kalamazoo, Michigan. Born and bred in Michigan, actually. So I grew up in the Detroit, or just outside of the Detroit area. And out of college, I started in the auto industry. So I was in the auto industry for about 4 years, and I worked for a company that developed and designed hybrid battery pack systems. So started in an engineering capacity, and then back in 2008, 2009, ended up moving over to the west side of the state. So got married, had a family, the whole nine, moved over to West Michigan, and really this is where we put down our roots here in both the medical device industry as well as with Stryker. So fast forward to today. I've been with Stryker for a little over 11 years. I've spent a majority of that time in our instruments division, and I'll walk through how Stryker is organized similar to what Russell did as well. But I started in our instruments division, and I was in various marketing and business development roles in that division in both orthopedic devices, so power tools and equipment used for orthopedic procedures. And then the latter part of that time with instruments, I was involved in our interventional spine business. So procedures done for back pain, spine issues, that are done interventionally. And then about a year and a half ago, I moved to our corporate business development group, which is based here in Kalamazoo as well. So fortunately, through these 11 years at Stryker, I've been able to stay in one location. As you think about Stryker, Stryker's really broken up into, I would say, 3 large groups. You have orthopedics, which is primarily our implant divisions. So this is your hips, knees. This is all of the trauma devices. If you break an arm, implants, and screws and plates and rods to fix that arm. And then our next group is our neurotechnology group. So this is neurovascular. This is our spine group that makes up our neurotechnology group. And then finally, you have our med-surg group. And our med-surg group is, if you think about all the products that are involved in that's that division that I used to work in. So instruments is a part of med-surg. And instruments includes, again, devices used in procedures, disposables used in the procedures, but primarily in the spaces of orthopedics, as well as just generic devices through the hospital, such as beds. I think a lot of people, when they think of Stryker, they think of our beds, because that's as a patient, that's a device often you see as you're visiting loved ones. So that's it for an introduction for myself, John.
I think I had muted myself. Okay, let me unmute myself. Thanks, both of you. Clearly, both well-known names. Sometimes, the smaller one, Stryker, being maybe a little bit more visible, ironically, than, Cardinal being everywhere, but equally as strong. And you both grown by acquisition. So that's kind of what we want to talk about today is, keeping the exit in mind. And so, maybe, let's start. Let's go backwards and start back with Aaron and Stryker. Give the people kind of a sense of what it is you all look for when you're acquiring. And I know we talked a lot about startups, and we do have startups on the call, but it would be even a big size company and a division of them, and they have a new product or something that they've developed that maybe fits into your portfolio. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a startup, but what are some key components? And, as the three of us have talked too, share us some things, some, nuggets of wisdom that you always, run across, like they forgot about that part, or, oh my God, I wish they would have dealt with that 5 years ago or 3 years ago. But what are the key components that you all are looking for when you start to really truly assess a company you may acquire?
Yeah,
Aaron, we'll start with you.
Yeah, great question, John. It was actually interesting. So Russell and I, we hopped on this call ahead of time, and I heard John and others talk about some of the prior sessions, and it sounds like there was a prior session on customer needs and really trying to understand the needs of customers, surgeons, et cetera. The way I would look at your business, a small business, if I was a business owner, being able to see it through a corporate strategic such as Stryker, I would think about desirability, viability, and feasibility. So it sounds like earlier today, you guys talked about the desirability and feasibility component. So desirability meaning, do customers want it? Feasibility, how can you build it, right? But the last component here, and I think this will address your question, John, is the viability, which is this business worthwhile? Is this business something that, if we're keeping the exit in mind, the end in mind, can I IPO it? Can I sell it to a PE or a corporate strategic? Is something that you should be thinking about on the forefront. Matter of fact, again, if I was a small business owner and I was a driving CEO of a startup, and I'm doing VOC customer feedback, I'm doing the same type of customer feedback with corporate strategics to ensure I'm keeping their needs at the forefront. Yeah, so a few things through the lens of Stryker, and I'll touch on a few areas where I think Stryker could be unique when compared to other corporate strategics from a needs perspective. One is typically, Stryker is going to be risk averse. And what I mean by that is we want to see a product that already has regulatory clearance. It has proof of and robust reimbursement. And then finally, it has some commercial proof, right? Say $5-10 million, but it has sales behind it. So to me, that's the first area we'll look at. Now, many times we're starting these relationships with these startup companies early on. So these relationships start predating having those components from a risk perspective. As you consider the dollar amount, I threw out $10 million, and that's kind of a vague amount in terms of commercial sales. I would keep that relative to the company that you're looking at. And from a corporate strategic perspective, what I mean by that is if it's call it a $15 billion rev company like Stryker, a $2 million product that startup is looking to sell may or may not hit the radar of Stryker. So depending on the size of that startup and the size of the revenue you have behind that, it may prioritize or shift the priority therein within the corporate strategic. And then the other thing I would mention too is, in terms of regulatory and reimbursement, I think that's dependent on end market. And I give one example, which is Stryker. I'd mentioned we have this neurotechnology group within Stryker, and we have a business called neurovascular. Typically, neurovascular in that end market will transact sooner than our other businesses. So very much end market dependent. Another company I would point to is Boston Scientific. They will typically transact sooner because of their end markets and because of the competitive nature within those end markets. Last couple of items, John, I'll note is do your work, meaning as we move through the process of due diligence, we'll take an entire army of people, due diligence experts and subject matter expertise to turn over every rock at your company. And what I mean by do your work and do it right is your DHF systems, your quality management systems, all of your systems. Stryker's pretty good at this, and they will uncover whether or not that's robust. So do your work, make sure that your systems are buttoned up. And then lastly, I'll touch on valuation, because many times we'll see companies that have been now de-risked. We'll see companies that have a really strong, robust system, but they haven't been grounded in terms of the valuation of their company. And many times you can do that yourself. You can look at the valuation of your company through the lens of a corporate strategic by doing simple transaction multiple work, which is all data you can get a hold of. You can do this work, just by simple Google searches, but that will start to frame what type of revenue you need to have, because these transaction multiples are based off of revenue for these startup companies many times. That'll kind of give you a frame of reference for what type of revenue you need to have to achieve that end sale that you're hoping for. So, John, those are a few things that we would look at, and a couple of things that I'd summarize.
Sounds awesome. Russell?
Great kickoff, Aaron. Let me sort of add on to that with a couple of qualitative factors that I think helps to frame, when it's right to exit, but also how you can really drive value or attractiveness for a large public company like a Stryker or a Cardinal. And the first that comes to mind for me is really defensible differentiation. So breaking that down into its two component parts, there will be no matter how unique your solution to a problem is, there will be others working to solve that same problem. So thinking about how your solution is different, perhaps better in some ways, perhaps has some weaknesses in other areas, but thinking about how it is different and how it solves the problem in a unique way is really important. And the second part of that is equally as important, and is that defensible? How easily replicable is this for somebody with greater resources, greater reach, but perhaps even others that are solving this problem to pivot into your space. So whether that's IP, whether that's unique talent, whether that's a different process, whether that's a customized solution, there's lots of different ways to get after that. But I think putting it in context, is my solution both defensible and differentiated from others who are trying to reach or address the same problem? The second piece that I would add from a Stryker and a Cardinal standpoint is it scalable? Is this a solution that is so customized or takes so long to get right for the individual use case that it's not really scalable? In those cases, you may have a tremendous product, but it's just not right for a Cardinal or for a Stryker, who are really looking to capitalize on our breadth and our scale to drive those solutions to a much broader audience and take advantage of a total market opportunity. So there may be a very unique solution that's entirely defensible, but only applies to a very narrow swath of the market. That may not be right for a large public company where we're looking at numbers of transactions. How do we scale this up and make it replicable so that we can roll it out in a very broad way? So those are two components I think are really important as you're thinking about both the exit, but also how to get started in your business plan or growing your business into a place that it could be acquired.
That's excellent from both of you. I can't, oh my gosh, I ran out of my note page already with some highlights. I'm glad we're videoing this and taping it. Diving in just to a couple of things that each of you said, just to elaborate a bit on, I think, and then we'll get to some of the strategic things that you both touched on. But maybe both of you can share a hair bit more on valuation. I was very, very active for many years in the Ohio Tech Angel Fund. Up to a couple years ago, it was the largest angel fund in the country, based in Columbus, Ohio. I know when I kind of not left, but was not as engaged, there were 340 members, obviously accredited investors, and they did a wonderful job of coaching entrepreneurs on keeping the exit in mind. Okay, and they would do a cross thing with 5 different valuation models, and then they would blend those together to give a matrix. But I guess I want both of your takes on a number too. There's pre-revenue companies that have $25-30 million of valuation, but they have 0 revenue. Is that a non-starter with you all? Maybe it's not, maybe it isn't, because of the other elements you kind of said. A comment, because sometimes it seems to be a deal killer from the start. You have 100 investors, angel investors in there, and oh my gosh, the cap table is all this kind of stuff. Just comment on each of your parts. What are some things to keep in mind on the valuation from realistically? And there's not a right or wrong. It's just what it is. And we're here in the Midwest, not in California or the East Coast. So it's you guys.
Yeah, maybe I'll give a shot at that for a couple of just anecdotes, I would say. So I think certainly, and I have zero intention of walking through valuation techniques or matrices. All of those sort of academic efforts are important in sort of thinking about your company's valuation. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to have perspective. So you may see these eye-popping multiples or deals that Google or other incubators or angel investors, private equity are throwing at businesses. And typically that is, John, as you referenced, all about the growth to come. So pre-revenue begins to be a bit challenging when you start thinking about acquisitions by public companies who have wide open disclosure to their investors about what they think they can achieve in a given year and have to really meet the expectations of those existing investors. So those kinds of large acquisitions tend to be more problematic. I won't say by any means that they are off limits, because when there are high growth or strong opportunities that meet the rest of the criteria, I think you would see a Cardinal or a Stryker being equally as interested in those. That being said, I think the most important thing from a valuation perspective is really stepping back to think about the fact that valuation is in the eye of the beholder. So what a Cardinal or a Stryker might be willing to offer you for your business may be very different from the way you view the value, or another investor may view the value. So you really have to think about both your own business in a standalone or competitive context, but also in the context of the potential acquirer and what they can do with it. We all know the sort of general principle of when you acquire a company, you are effectively paying a little bit extra to control the operations of that business. At the end of the day, there has to be an offsetting synergy for the acquirer to overcome what they're paying over and above the value of just the standard operations of the business. So I think putting it in the context of who you may be discussing the evaluation with is really important. Knowing sort of what the market will bear is an important component, and there's a lot of ways to look at that. But also that it's going to be worth, your business may be worth different amounts to different people depending upon their own strategies, the acquiring company's capital position or growth ambitions. So it's not a one-size-fits-all environment. And I think being reasonable and understanding the trade-offs that occur there is really an important starting point. We've spent a lot of time with early stage businesses that frankly have unrealistic valuation expectations for where they are in their life cycle. And so I think it's important to just understand the give and take that's involved in evaluation. It's a two-sided arrangement.
And that's always, Russell, a hard message to sell, to give back to the father or the mother of that company. It's like, oh my, your valuation is it's not real. But, and I think that's where a lot of the more mature investors do give that. It's not that they're being penal to the person or the founders. It's like, it's just not realistic.
And John, you bring up a good point there. And I think that for a lot of founder-owned businesses or founder-controlled businesses, there's an emotional component. It's virtually one of your children. You have built it, nurtured it, grown it to a place, and you're preparing to effectively cede control or give up that parental relationship. There's an emotional component that has tremendous value to you. It has no value to the acquirer. And so as you think about it, there is a real sort of dispassionate view that you have to take about your own business. And it's much more based on hard facts, numbers, projections, and sort of market acceptance than it is how you feel about it or the blood, sweat, and tears that you've put into it over time. So I think just disconnecting the emotion from the actual nuts and bolts of how a deal gets done and the value that's indicated by sort of more traditional metrics is really an important piece for young life cycle companies.
Aaron, I'll let you go. Just pile on with your comments on some of that stuff.
Yeah, Russell, all great points. I may even just reiterate and hit on what I mentioned to kick it off. There is, if you're starting, small company startup, really think through that universe of corporate strategics. Who are they? And I'll pick an easy example for me, which would be orthopedics. Let's say you're focused on the orthopedic category. Well, your obvious corporate strategics are Stryker, Zimmer, Smith and Nephew, J&J. And then what I would do, this is just easy homework, right? Then I would look at what prior transactions have those companies had, and look over the last, call it 5 years, and just do your homework. Are they doing pre-revenue deals? Are they doing post-revenue deals? What types of multiples? And what I mean by multiples is based on their prior, last 12 months of revenue, what are they, on a multiple basis, how much more is that corporate strategic paying for them? All of those things are simple, homework items that any startup could do very easily just to ground themselves. I'll give a couple of examples. John, you brought up pre-revenue, and I think often from what I've seen, it's very difficult to sell when you have pre-revenue, at least in the markets that I get exposure to. One good example is software. So software in med tech is challenging as an example because it's very tough to monetize that. So if you can't monetize it, you can't drive revenue. And often, I think a lot of within med tech, as these startups are looking at what revenue multiples they can get, they're basing it off of Facebook and Google, but it's very different market, very different multiples. So really getting grounded on that, I think, is critical. I think that's all I'd add. But yeah, great points, Russell.
Hey, Aaron, let me stick with you a bit and definitely jump right back to Russell to stick with this kind of point or give some guidance on how early should a company engage with you. I think, Aaron, and I'll just start with you just because you mentioned it, an early engagement. So let's say they're not ready for an exit. They may be thinking about it down the road, but they do need some strategic vision and advice and some of the guidance that you all have said already. But how can they kind of talk to you? Should they talk to you? When should they talk to you? What are the expectations from both sides? Because they're just probably looking for guidance and advice, not necessarily they're going to acquire. You may, if they hit some of those points. But will you give them the Heisman, because they're not ready for prime time, or will you engage with them? Give some advice on that.
Yeah, I would say the sooner the better, John. And the reason I say this is a corporate strategic can help course correct. So if a startup is taking one direction, a corporate strategic can provide, again, their needs, their views, which of course, as a startup, you want to meet the corporate strategic's needs or views if that is your desire to exit with an acquisition to a corporate strategic. So, John, I would say the sooner the better. Now, I caveat that with, I can tell you, we get so many different napkin sketches, ideas, IP, that is hitting us left and right all the time, and it's just tough to digest all that. So realistically, where we would typically engage a bit more is once there's a concept, something you can feel, touch, you can get in front of customers. Once you have something that's a functional concept, from a realistic point, I would say we would engage very quickly. But if I'm a startup, don't squander that time period. Engage as fast as possible.
Totally agreed. I think I'd add to that in a couple of different ways. First, look, the name of the panel is begin with the end in mind, and I think that's really sage advice in this situation. Think about what the ultimate end game is for your business. Are you thinking you might sell to a strategic? Are you thinking Stryker is the perfect acquirer? Are you thinking Cardinal might be an interested party? Maybe there's 3 or 4 parties, or maybe you're targeting to shoot the moon, go public, and sort of be the next unicorn. Any of those are acceptable answers, but I think you need to have one preferred path in mind and continue to think about how you're going to march towards it. In the case where you say, look, a Stryker or one of their competitors might be my preferred exit, or that's a business that I can see owning my business in the future, engage early. Many large public companies and many private companies have venture arms in which they invest dollars and have teams that are meant to specifically go in and help provide some of that commercial expertise, some of that scaling thinking, and help you make connections to validate the market opportunity for your product or service. So really taking that end in mind approach is really step one. But step two is don't be afraid of engaging early, but also recognize that when you do engage early, you are effectively picking a path. So you may be cutting off other exit opportunities. Not necessarily bad. The acceleration may occur better in an environment where you've got a large corporate partner or a venture partner to help you move through the maturity curve. But at the end of the day, I think it's most important to always be thinking about how you plan to either monetize or take that sort of ultimate or penultimate step for your company and continue to target and work through it.
That's cool. A personal question on this is my question that I did share with you guys earlier, but this didn't come from the audience. Gosh, 8, 9, 10 years ago, freedom to operate was a huge word. You guys talked about regulatory. Everybody seems to forget about reimbursement, and I'm glad both of you commented about reimbursement. Obviously, if you have a reimbursement code, not that you just fall into, awesome. So I'm glad you both mentioned reimbursement. On the audience, reimbursement, have it. These guys will be happier. But on the intellectual property side, obviously there's patents, issued patents, stuff in the works. But freedom to operate was a smoking hot issue that was seen to be separate. I haven't heard much of that the last couple of years. Is that just because I've been out of the investor mix and you guys are in the throes of it now? Is it still a real thing, or did it kind of migrate and it just kind of is part of the whole due diligence process?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in here real quick. Absolutely, that's still critical, and absolutely that's part of the due diligence process, John. I would say, depending on the market though, and I go back to understand your customer, meaning the strategic that could potentially own your business, understand the market you work in, and from that lens and from a market perspective, freedom to operate in IP and the IP minefields that could be present vary on an end market to end market basis, and I think where you're going to see freedom to operate in IP minefields be a bigger issue is these new spaces, neurostimulation, robotics, vascular, interventional procedures. These new cutting edge procedures and areas of medicine, there's just going to be a bigger IP minefield. Now, why are we not seeing that on some of the older, more mature established markets? Well, because likely that IP has run out. It's run its course, and IP is not as big of a competitive advantage as some of the other spaces.
Yep, totally agreed. Freedom to operate is absolutely a part of the diligence work that we do on any of our acquisitions. I would echo the same. I think really the relevance of the issue is more business specific. So if your business is predicated upon differentiated IP, then I think as you move forward, you should be investing some dollars in IP counsel to help you understand whether you may have infringement issues in the future, because we have certainly had transactions where we've done the analysis as an acquirer, being Cardinal Health, and come back and recognize that the value of the business is significantly less because we believe there has been some infringement that may require some legal remedies to get after. So I think really looking at the importance of IP to your business, how defensible it is, and then thinking through how you prepare for an eventual sale process or address that potential infringement well before it becomes an issue in a potential transaction. So it's absolutely still an issue. I think it's really incumbent upon the sellers or the startup company to be thoughtful about that before they get to a point that either they are trying to sell and find out that it's an issue, or are operating business in regular course and receive some form of legal injunction around the work that they're doing.
That's cool. Thank you for both. That's nice to clarify on my behalf, and hopefully those that are listening, because that's a key part. Hey, could each of you and we'll start with Russell, we'll just go back and forth here. Continue this kind of list. Can you kind of bulletize each of you? Not in a confidential way, but what are the broad categories that you're looking for? Russell, at Cardinal. And Aaron, you've mentioned a bunch, okay? But is there kind of a cool list? Because there's going to be things outside of Cardinal's purview like you're probably not really interested in orthopedic implants. I'm guessing. Not your hot spot to acquire. Could be for Russell, or could be for Aaron.
That's right.
But what's in Cardinal's sweet spot? Aaron, you kind of mentioned some bigger. Just kind of bulletize those. So because over the years, I try to direct people to those that would be interested. Now those strategic kind of focuses change, and they shift. That's okay. But at the moment, what are you guys?
Yeah, and maybe I'll address that through sort of a thematic answer, and it sort of comes in a couple of different areas. And the first I would say is we're all living in the midst of a pandemic where we're doing things like having a conference while sitting at home in front of our computers. So when you think about what some of the major developments within healthcare are being driven by the pandemic, really being in line with trends. So we're a very hospital-focused business. The reality is healthcare is rapidly moving outside of the hospital setting, no matter how acute your procedure is. Operating rooms are popping up in surgery centers and doctors' offices and lots of different places. And as such, our business is evolving because of that. So thinking about those trends that are accelerated by COVID, for me, it really starts with alternate sites of care, right? Care is quickly moving outside of the hospital, outside of clinics, and into freestanding centers or even into patients' homes. So things that are aligned with that trend. Going along the theme of sort of telehealth, what are the things that we can do that allows care delivery without two people being in the same room and touching each other? We've seen a lot of things, and Aaron can probably touch on this more than I can. Robotics in surgery, or surgery being done remotely, right? Sort of the guide wire approach. These are all trends that are real, and they're impacting our business and changing the healthcare landscape. And I think from a Cardinal perspective, we're looking at what are the great ideas that are emerging in those sort of trend bending types of settings. So that would be one thing. The other thing is just really the consumerization of healthcare. We've really started to take it from my plan allows this or my doctor suggests this to the individual dictating how they want and where they want to be treated, and what are the types of solutions, products, services that work well in those types of settings, and how can you make those scalable and adaptable to a business like Cardinal or like others that are looking to sort of move from the old healthcare model to something that looks and feels a little more 21st century, where we're doing things virtually, we're exchanging a lot more information, and we're customizing health solutions for the individual instead of for the masses. So that's maybe a couple of areas that I would mention. I know that's very general, but I think as you think of larger established companies, the nimbleness that young companies can bring to pivot and take advantage of some of those trend lines, you have that advantage over a large company. Despite the resource gap, you have the ability to pivot and move a lot quicker than our businesses do. So take advantage of that as you look at moving to really where the puck's going from a healthcare space.
Oh, Russell, I think that's right on. And Aaron, right before you kick into some of yours, I just know personally, I've been on a bunch of telehealth calls, primarily with an Ohio company called UpDocs that works with a lot of big medical systems. But these docs keep saying, John, will you get a company that can have a third or fourth party part of the call? Because what they need is not the one-on-one. That's fine. That's easy. That's what we're doing right now. But a lot of these patients need they have a third party there at the appointment, a caregiver, a husband, a wife, a spouse, a partner, a friend. And those people are currently not allowed from a different location onto these calls. So he says, John, please work on these companies to get the third party or the fourth party access so they can join in a HIPAA compliant way on these calls. So you're right on. Everything's changing and evolving. So Aaron, some of your comments on your hot spots.
Yeah, I love the direction that Russell took. I mean, if you look at Stryker specific, I kind of gave the introduction of Stryker and the businesses that we play in today. That would be a Stryker specific lens, and I think I touched on that. But building on what Russell said, there's two other spaces that I'd mention in medtech beyond. Russell, you talked about surgery centers, robotics. Two more, though, that I'd mention is minimally invasive surgery. That's a big trend and a big unmet need, whether that's orthopedic surgery, soft tissue surgery. That could be interventional work, right? Interventional radiology and all the MIS work there. It's trying to get smaller incisions. That's a big opportunity. And then the last one I'd mention is digital health. Digital health is a big hot space. Now, dovetailing to what I said earlier, though, that the challenge digital health has, I mean, they're going after big unmet needs, but is monetization. So knowing that if you're going to go after digital health, lots of unmet needs, and potentially the capital to get there is not quite as high. It's software. The challenge being, how in the world do you monetize that?
Hey, Russell and Aaron, I think we're running out of our time. But if, as we said, we have lots more questions. We'll get back questions to you, certainly if they're specific from some of the participants. But if they want to connect with you, is that okay? Or do you want them to go through myself or Andy? How can they connect with you at Cardinal or you at Stryker or via us? It's kind of open. It's open to you guys. Can we share?
happy to receive outreach and
Okay.
we'll of course prioritize and try to get back to you as quickly as possible. To Aaron's point, I think that's the fun part about being in a big public company is you do get a lot of outreach from companies early in their life cycle. We may not be a perfect fit, but we'll do our best to answer questions and address the inquiries one off. So happy to take that.
Yeah, John, likewise. Same here.
Well, Aaron and Russell, thank you very much. I know the team here, Audrey and all the organizers here are really sensitive, so am I, to everybody having a break and being able to, both network and doing whatever natural duty they have to do before 3 o'clock and the next session rolls along. But Russell and Aaron, thank you very much for sharing, lots and lots and lots of just super points, relevant, timely, and I can't thank you guys enough for being clear and precise, and I hope there's a lot of smiling faces out there over the last 48 minutes. So,
and thank you, John. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Yeah, echoing those sentiments. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, John, for moderating today. As John said, take a moment, grab a drink, drink of water, whatever you need, grab a snack for that, afternoon slump, and jump back in with us at 3 o'clock, our final session for MedTech Day at this year's Startup Week Dayton. We've got a successful founder sharing her exit story. So we'll be talking with Robin Gentry McGee from Functional Formularies. We hope to see you all at 3. Thank you.